Good morning, Dan and Amy. So, Lara Logan, former CBS News foreign correspondent, is now a special correspondent for Sinclair Media. And a report that she filed recently couldn't be more salient as it pertains to both the activity of drug cartels in Central America, in particular, Mexico and Central America, as well as border security. Of course, this is the topic du jour today, most notably because of the congressional delegation that was down in El Paso yesterday and the assertions that Ocasio-Cortez and her socialist gal pals made that have been refuted by Customs and Border Patrol, as well as, by the way, the caricatures of the Trump administration's policies that have been refuted by President Obama. I mean, indirectly through comments he made while he was president, through his Department of Homeland Secretary Jay Johnson, who talked about the fences used as demarcations to provide separation for people, men and women and so forth, when you've got hundreds of thousands of people being detained on an annual basis, more than 500,000 so far this year, which is a spike. Tom Homan, former ICE director, served in both the Obama administration and the Trump administration, who reacted to the New York Times op-ed over the weekend, accusing Customs and Border Patrol and the Trump administration of committing mass atrocities on the border, very consistent with the concentration camp comparison that Ocasio-Cortez made. So which is it when it comes to law enforcement at the border, locally and federally? Do we have people that are intentionally inflicting harm on vulnerable migrants trying to make their way into this country? Or do you have people who are overwhelmed by the allied challenges they face, humanitarian crisis, security crisis, criminal enterprises, organized criminal enterprises like the cartels, and are doing the best they can with less than sufficient resources and, frankly, political support? Well, why don't we put that question to somebody who's been investigating it? She is Lara Logan, as I said, now a special correspondent for Sinclair. Lara, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me.
Good. So you embedded with a retired captain with the Texas Department of Public Safety who had spent a lot of time tracking Mexican drug cartels. And what is it you learned from working, from being, essentially being embedded with him?
Well, okay, so I wasn't really embedded, all right, because he's retired, so there's no organization to embed with. But what we did was, I've spent the last few months down, on and off down at the border most of the time, and I came across this individual in my work, and we asked him to come down to a place called Roma with us, because in many ways, all roads were leading to Roma for me. Every time I turned around, Roma's name kept coming up. And when I went there, I understood why, right? Roma, for example, it's a really good example to me of what is happening down on the border, because the facility down there built by Border Patrol is built to house around 117 adults temporarily, right? And on one Sunday morning on June 2nd, they got close to 1,000 people in that zone. In fact, in the zone itself, they got more than 1,000 people. They got more than 1,200 people. But the zone 5 that includes Roma is a little bit bigger than Roma itself. And you get a sense of the scale of this when you realize that 600, 700, 800 people are coming into one small town on one Sunday morning. And in Roma, we were neighboring Brooks County on another day, and the sheriff was telling us about, they were getting phone calls from Roma every weekend saying, hey, we've got 300, 400, 500, 600 people. We got no buses. Do you guys have any buses you can lend us? We don't have any more vehicles to transport people with. I've talked to pilots with Air and Marine Operations who described flying over Roma and seeing rafts with anywhere between 70 to 200, more than 200 people, all crossing at the same time, but staggered at 5 different sections of the river in Roma, which is the border. And not knowing which way to turn in order, and who to stop, right, and who to follow. So, and the pilots described this to me as deliberate tactics that were being used by the Gulf Cartel, which owns that section of the border, to divert their resources, so that you literally, can you imagine if you have groups in excess of 150, all 5 different groups all crossing at the same time? If any of those people fall into the water and they don't know how to swim, where does Border Patrol go? How do they get to them? On any given day in Roma, there's between 10 to 20 Border Patrol agents on security for 68 miles of border. Okay, 68 miles of border. What do you think 10 to 20 Border Patrol agents are able to achieve security-wise when they're spread that thin? And ordinarily, before this current crisis, they would have around 40 agents for the same section of border. Now, some people argue that 40 agents isn't enough, but the point is they've got less than half of that right now. So,
sorry for interrupting.
Diminished.
Oh, is the terrain okay where they could build a wall there? Do you think that would stop people from coming in?
Well, sometimes people say to me, well, "What are they going to do? Build a wall in the river?" Which is interesting, because that just reveals politics to me, right? Because it's not my job. I'm a journalist. It's not my job to advocate for a wall or to advocate against a wall, right? Neither of those things are my job.
No, I wasn't asking you your opinion. I was just asking if were there plans on the table to build something there.
Yes, actually, there were plans on the table. And in fact, the mayor of Hidalgo County was recently quoted and reported widely in the press as saying it as an achievement that he reduced the 8 miles of wall that was supposed to be built in that area down to 4 miles. Okay. And I was told that the 4 miles will now bypass Roma. And the mayor is a Democrat, and he was touting this as an achievement, because now there won't be a wall around Roma under the current plan, where there was going to be. Now, some people have raised to me, well, I'm not really sure whether that's an achievement for the mayor or an achievement for the cartel that now get to maintain Roma as a corridor.
Let me, since you've had so much experience at the border and interacting with law enforcement, I just have to get your reaction to the characterizations that were made by Ocasio-Cortez and others, because it's mutually exclusive. Either these are concentration camps and Border Patrol are, Nazi stormtroopers, or these are law enforcement agents trying to do their best. And maybe if somebody makes an off-color remark on Facebook or does something stupid or mistreats somebody, and they need to be accountable for that. And there needs to be disciplinary, of course, just like in any disciplinary action, just like in any organization. But you're talking about two wildly different pictures of who these folks are, and I just wanted to get your comment on that.
Well, I would say, if you just start factually, okay, I'm sure everyone who's old enough remembers the pictures from Auschwitz and other concentration camps of piles and piles and piles of, for example, spectacles, right, from the glasses.
Yes.
When hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people have been put to death, that's a very different picture from what you're seeing on the border. The comparison is factually ludicrous. And I know that the distinction was later made between death camps and concentration camps. That's really strange to me, because the first concentration camps that were built by the British in South Africa many years ago were very much death camps for the people who lived in them, right? And what you're talking about is Border Patrol has, I think, people just don't understand the most basic facts about the situation on the border. Border Patrol's job, they're not a prison system, right? They're not meant to hold people long term. And that's one of the biggest things here is that, concentration camps do hold people long term, but there is an emotional symbolism associated with using a term like that, which is to me, I'm more shocked that people in this country allow others in their party to get away with using terms like that when they know the truth. I think this is one thing we always forget about, is when we hear things reported, right, is the average person out there doesn't know the truth. They don't have access to the information. They don't have access to the congressional records. They don't have access to the people and to the organizations the way that members of Congress and senators do. Okay, every single one of them has access to this information. And so anyone who's making those kind of claims when they know the truth, they know that Border Patrol are not trying to hurt people. If you've got more than 155,000 people crossing the border in the South during the summer, there are people who are going to get into trouble physically and who are going to need help that exceeds what Border Patrol is able to give them. Border Patrol has a few medics. From what I've observed, they don't have doctors on staff. So if you're coming over the border and you get checked by an EMT, that's not the same as going to a hospital or to a doctor if you really need medical care. And when you're coming over that border, I can tell you there are parts of the southern border where we have just stood and without even moving. I mean, we are sweating buckets. It's so hot down there. It's easy to see how people who probably haven't slept or eaten properly for weeks, if not months at a time, and who have been, maybe have been sick before, it's easy to see how these people are going to get into trouble. And it's also easy to see how Border Patrol is not going to be able to take care of everybody, and they're not going to make the right decisions. These are temporary facilities. They're not built for children. They're built for adults, and mostly adult males. The time they were built, most of the time, was when people were coming from Mexico and they were coming to work and then being sent back to Mexico. And of course, many of these facilities were built under the last administration. Some of them were built under the Bush administration. Some of them span, several administrations. So pushing this all onto one administration politically is obviously just a political move, right? Yeah. It's not a factual move.
Well, so
when you get down into the facts.
Yeah. What are they doing with all the people then that are going to Roma? Where are they shipping them to other towns or what? Sending them back?
Well,
what's happening?
This is an excellent question to me, and it's one I keep asking. You get different answers depending on who you ask. Mm-hmm. Some of these people are going into facilities that run by Health and Human Services, right? Mm-hmm. HHS. And they are the people who have the legal authority to hold, for example, minors, unaccompanied minors, while the government tries to figure out, do they have any relatives in this country? If you have a relative here, or you have a legal guardian, and that can be pretty much, proved to the satisfaction of the government, then if you're an unaccompanied minor, after your period of time is up, so you're sent to these people. So basically, it's a ticket or a passport or whatever you want to call it. It's a way into the United States of America. If you're not an unaccompanied minor and you have legal actions pending against you, depending on the severity of those actions, if you actually committed a crime, well, then you go to somebody else, right? You go to ICE, and you go to an ICE detention facility. If you have been deported before and you have no criminal record, but you do have legal deportation orders against you, then, you can either go to ICE or to USCIS. So the picture gets more and more and more complicated, but typically what's happening to families is they're being released into the U.S. with a notice to appear, and there's been a dispute over how many of those people appear and how many don't appear.